Okay, so welcome back. In this video, I would like to just give an overview of this tool Orchard that I've been building, which is designed to let you build and manipulate the kinds of diagrams that we were exploring in the last couple of videos. So the sort of intuition is that one thing that makes these apotopic diagrams special is that they can serve, if you like, as a language, a system of expressions for manipulating cells in a higher category, and that looked at from that perspective, they don't really need any more explanation than that. So Orchard is sort of a prototype implementation of that idea, where the only operations available to you are manipulating the cells that you've created and building proofs out of those cells. So obviously this is inspired quite a bit by some of the recent work on homotopy type theory, but it has, in a certain sense, a different aim. The goal is maybe to give us a kind of answer to the question, what would a categorical proof assistant look like? So what if we wanted to build a proof assistant that just sort of did category theory the way we do category theory at the blackboard? What might that look like? And so the intuition is somehow like when we do category theory, we paste together cells and derive the existence of new cells and use axioms to understand universal properties and how these cells interact. So what does a proof assistant that can do that look like? Okay, so when you start up Orchard, this is the first view you'll see. It's pretty blank. On the left is the environment. It's the cells that Orchard sort of knows about. It's empty right now because we haven't told Orchard that there are any cells around. Down here is a little preview pane for inspecting the cells that you've already made if you need to look back and understand what a definition of a cell was or something like that. And here in the center is where all the action takes place. It's where you build, paste together, and derive consequences of the cells that you have. So in this video, I'm not going to explain any of the specifics. Why don't we just open an example and see what that looks like. So there's a couple examples here that come with the source. In this directory by category, I started verifying some of the axioms of a by category. It's not finished yet, but I'm pretty confident that they can all be done. So let's just look at, for example, left whiskering. So what Orchard is showing me here is, on the left, all the cells that it knows about in this proof. And the cells in yellow are axioms. They're hypotheses or assumptions. So if you're familiar with Coq or Agda, this would be like the in Coq assuming an axiom, or in Agda a postulate, I think they call it. Whereas the red and blue cells down here at the bottom are the analog of something like a definition. They're a cell that is derived as a consequence from the axioms. And Orchard distinguishes between two different types. The red cells are cells which may or may not be invertible. Invertible is a sort of first approximation here, but in any case, it's a good way to start thinking about it. And the blue cells are cells which must be invertible or universal because of the axioms. So if you, for example, click on one of these cells, Orchard will tell you what it knows about that cell. And here it's just saying that X is assumed to be an object. So it's yellow, and it's the shape of an object. And similarly for Y and for Z. And then F is a little bit more complicated. It's not that much more complicated, but it's just an arrow from X to Y, and it's yellow, so it's an assumed arrow from X to Y. And similarly for G. And in the middle here, you can see we have a couple sheets where I played with and manipulated these cells. And as an example, why don't I put into a new sheet, which I can obtain by just going to the file menu here. Why don't I put in our assumptions so we can see exactly the shape our assumptions make so far. So to do that, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space, and I'll explain in some later videos how I'm making these changes. but now I'm just going to stick these guys in their places. So I'm going to put X there, and I'll put Y there. I'm going to put Z here. I guess I could have done this faster, actually. Let me just put A up here, and let me put F right here. So so in this middle area, you can see I've taken cells that Orchard knows about, and I've arranged them in a diagram, and Orchard will check as I go whether when I put the cells in a blank space, whether they really fit in that space. So it will make sure that I don't paste together cells in a way which doesn't make sense. And you might notice that, so if I click here on A, down here in the preview pane, we don't see these extra gray boxes. And that's because as I'm manipulating cells, I may need to make pictures which don't form a complete optope. So for example, here we have a 2-cell and a 1-cell, but those cells don't form a single optopic cell, and these extra gray boxes allow me to encode that in a certain way. So you can think of them as sort of like a frame or a workspace in which you can make pasting diagrams. But in any case, so here's a collection of cells, and if you stare at this for a second, you realize, well, we have an arrow from X to Y, and then we have 2 arrows going out of Y and a 2-cell connecting them. This is exactly the situation where we would expect to define a cell which whiskers this 2-cell by this 1-cell right here. And in what remains in this file, I prove exactly that. So let's look at for example, this cell here, def HF. If I stare at it down here, Orchard is telling me it's a universal cell connecting this pasting diagram with this cell right here. So if you know much about optopic categories, or even if you don't, you can just take my word for it. This essentially says that HF is a composite of these 2 1 cells, and you can see it has exactly the shape you'd expect. H and F are 2 pastable arrows, and HF goes from X to Z, and then the universal cell records that definition, which is why I've called it def HF. And you can go through this file and look at some of the other cells. I also create GF. And if you think about what the whiskering is supposed to be, well, when I whisker alpha by F, I'm supposed to get a 2-cell connecting G composed with F with H composed with F. And if you go down here and click at the cell which is which I've labeled A left F, it's exactly that. It's exactly a cell which connects GF and HF, and right, and it's not an assumed cell. Orchard is storing in memory a definition of that cell, a definition of the steps you need to take to prove in an optopic category that there is such a whiskering. So that's sort of the main idea. The main idea is that you use this main area to put together shapes, paste them together, and manipulate them. Orchard will remember your assumptions and then your definitions, and you can preview those assumptions and definitions down here. So in the next couple videos, I'll show you in more detail how you can build these diagrams for yourself.